speech, I quoted Patrick Henry when he said, quote, "A people were nor ever will be secure when the transactions of their rulers are concealed from them," end quote. I'd like to bring us back to that in this last affirmative speech of the round. But first, I'd like to go ahead and start with the values. The values. And we've been going back and forth in this round between the values. My opponent brought up the point of the rich man and the poor man. He said, when our life is really in danger, we would choose his value of quality of life. However, I would contest. If my life was truly in danger, I would choose quality of life. And why would I do this? Because I realized that with quality of life, I have more than just a life. I have a life that has the ability that I can live in liberty, where I can have my property protected, where I can have prosperity. As I remember in the example that I brought up, the citizens of the Soviet Union who lived in those prisons and dungeons that they were put in, they had life. They didn't have to make the choice for life. They had life. But because they didn't have quality of life, they lived in these terrible situations where all of my opponents' value was achieved. They had life. They did not have a life that most of us would want to live. And therefore, for this reason, I would still contest that quality of life is the highest value because it does give us life plus more. Now, I'd like to go on and talk about my opponent. My opponent was talking about, he said reality. He was talking about reality. He was talking about how we have to apply the definition of national security to the real world. He was talking about hypothetical examples. Now, I would like to just simply say that we can look at this basically as a scientific experiment almost. Now, with a hypothetical example, we have a hypothesis, we have an idea. We have to test it to see if it will actually work. And therefore, we apply it to the real world. We say, this is the definition of national security. Let us apply it to the real world. Now, in the real world, remember, it is the government that is executing this national security. And since the government is executing this national security in the real world, this hypothesis, when tested, will leave the government to execute what it believes is national security, because the government is the one executing national security. They are the only ones that can define it. They're the only ones that can identify a threat because they can execute it. Now, we the people may have different ideas on what national security is, but in the end, it's the government that makes the final decision because they are the ones executing national security, as we agreed to in cross-examination. And because of this, when it's valued above privacy, it gives the government the power and the ability to violate quality of life. My opponent went on to talk about dropped applications. And I would like to point out that I responded to not necessarily the applications themselves, but the contention under which it was under. The contention said privacy is secondary. It said privacy was secondary. However, as I've shown in the examples of Ethiopia, now as I've shown in the example of Israel, when privacy becomes secondary, quality of life and life becomes secondary to government interests and abuse. When we put privacy second, it allows government to invade the privacy of our lives and take away our rights. Why? Because national security above privacy gives the government the power to do whatever it likes. And for all these reasons, that valuing individual privacy above national security puts the power in the hands of the people and not the government. I strongly urge an affirmative ballot.